Welcome to Intangibles, a podcast about traits, behaviors, and qualities that entrepreneurs can cultivate to help them be successful. I'm your host, Steve BERG. I'm a partner at a New York City-based venture capital fund called Lytical Ventures. Season 4 is brought to you by Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Also, please find Intangibles on the web at www.intangiblespodcast.com. Essentialism, in its broadest sense, is any philosophy that acknowledges the primacy of essence. The driving principle behind essentialism is that time is a gating factor, so we should do what is most important or most valuable first and only. Many people don't prioritize this way. I think startup founders, by the nature of their chosen profession, should. Greg McKeown is a public speaker, leadership and business consultant, and author. In 2014, he wrote the book Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. If I'm successful, today he's going to put us onto the path of essentialism, which I suspect most people listening either may already be doing in some form or fashion, or would agree surely couldn't hurt. Hi, Greg. It's nice to meet you. I'm glad to have you on the podcast. Most people know who know me would attest that I'm a process and efficiency type. And I think of essentialism as kind of the one ring to rule them all when it comes to that.
I've never heard that description before, but I like it. I like it. As a Lord of the Rings buff myself, I would never have taken the audacious step to imagine that essentialism could be the one ring to rule them all, But since I said
it,
I'll take it.
Yeah, since I said it exactly, and you didn't have to say it. There we go. So look, I was practicing essentialism when I provided your bio. Is there anything specific, or some details, things that you find relatively important of the things that you've done in your career?
I think what matters most is what you do next in your career. And so that's something that's on my mind as you say that. I wrote Essentialism. That was a big deal. It was a big deal that it became a New York Times bestseller. That was, my children were really surprised by that. And but even though I plan to write again and so on, I have actually put that on hold because of what I want to do next, and that's consistent with the themes of essentialism. Because I didn't just do the next book as you're quote unquote supposed to do.
Right.
It would be easy to do the next book. It pays better the second time around. You've got lots of ideas to do it. The publisher's ready for it. The agent's ready for it. I mean, in a sense, everything is built to advocate just doing it again. But instead, what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing is a next level project with a larger footprint, larger impact, but smaller footprint. And I think that can be achieved through a new platform. So what I really want to do is try to see if we can't take essentialism to a larger audience through a television show. Oh. And it's very early days still, so I recognize it's a long journey, and but it's not just a high risk journey. I suppose it could be perceived that way, but because we've paid the price to really be sure that it's the right next thing. It's actually, in a sense, I think, a low-risk strategy, because if you know it's the right thing, then anything less than pursuing it is, in fact, a higher-risk strategy. It takes you off course, takes you onto some other thing, even if it looks more certain by other people's opinions and standards.
So you just did three things right there. One, you illustrated a couple of principles of essentialism, which we will get to. Two, you teased a television show, which I hadn't heretofore heard about. So, like, I consider you to have broken news. And three, you've provided the perfect entree into talking about this. So let's dive right in. Why don't we define essentialism for those people who have not read the book, and let's try and talk about what it means as a function of both personal life and work life. And I'm even going to qualify that work life piece, if possible, through the filter of entrepreneurship.
It's not hard to explain essentialism through the lens of entrepreneurship, because that's where I first observed it. I was working with companies in Silicon Valley, noticed a predictable pattern, and almost every entrepreneur knows the pattern. At some point, you have clarity about what you're trying to do and what you're not trying to do. And when you have clarity, that's sort of stage one. It leads to success. It drives success. There's a strong relationship between clarity and success. When you start to have success, it increases options and opportunities. You have more money to invest. You have you've got a product. You know how to create products. Creating the second one is easier than creating the first one. And so you have this, what feels like the right problem to have, but it in fact does turn out to be a problem if it leads to what Jim Collins has called the undisciplined pursuit of more. Mm-hmm. And the undisciplined pursuit of more is really the trouble of our story, because once an entrepreneur falls into that pattern, they'll start to plateau in their progress or fail altogether. And so their success is, in fact, become a catalyst for failure. And there's many stories of highly driven, highly capable, curious, interested entrepreneurs who follow that ill-fated journey. This is the problem of our story, the enemy of our story. The hero of our story is essentialism, which is the antidote, the disciplined pursuit of less, so that you are constantly exploring what's essential, removing what's non-essential, so that you can actually build a system to make execution as easy and effortless and supportive as possible around those things that matter most.
So you'll always, if followed, you will always find your highest point of contribution.
Well, that's the idea. You're constantly searching for that.
Yeah.
You're not looking for one more thing to do.
Yeah.
You're looking for the very best and highest use of you.
So why isn't working harder and trying to do more the answer? Why am I trying to do less? Why don't I be like, no, we can just create more output?
Well, if you're not doing anything, that is the right strategy. If somebody's being lazy, if somebody's just talking about their entrepreneurial venture, but they're not doing anything, they're not taking action on it, then yes, you do need to start doing things. And there is a correlation between working harder and getting better results. But that correlation only exists to a certain point. Yeah. So at a certain point, in fact, I just was reading some recent research on this that described the productivity as following an M curve. Oh. And the M curve suggests that in the early days, you work harder, longer hours, your productivity goes up, but then it reaches a tipping point, starts to come down. So even though you're putting in more hours, you will get, in fact, less productivity, not just less productivity per hour. It's not just a per hour relationship. Mm-hmm. It's the total productivity will fall when you're giving more. As you continue up the number of hours you give, there will come a point where productivity starts to go back up again, but it never comes even close to where you are in the first reach of increased productivity. So it's not like in the second, peak of the M, you'll get even further. You won't. You'll never reach higher than in that first peak. So the idea is to be in that peak position. Mm. So what do you do if you want to have a higher contribution? Then the key is clearly not to go past that point in terms of how many hours you put in and how busy you are. And in fact, you see this all the time, that people get this wrong. Entrepreneurs who are constantly busy, running around, sleeping less, taking less breaks, and actually their business is not thriving. Things aren't actually working, and it's getting in their way. And what's happening is a bad idea, an idea that says, that it's not an M curve. It says that it's just simply you do more and you'll get more. Mm. And there's something that sounds so fair about that. We buy into it. We believe it. But in fact, it's just not what happens. So if you study the people that have broken through to the next level, it's not because they've doubled the number of hours they're putting in.
Right.
It's because they've thought differently, thought smarter, thought better, thought more as an essentialist. What are the few things that really matter, and invest better and better in the fewer and fewer things that are more and more valuable. That's the idea.
Sorry, so let me see if I understood. In this M curve, from 0 to the first peak, working harder actually is the answer. But once we peak, then there's a law of not only diminishing returns, but negative returns. And then at the second peak of the M, there's a point where thinking more and doing less actually becomes more productive than doing more.
Just so. And so the implication of the M curve is just that we need now to unlock the next level up through a different strategy.
Right.
So if you take any entrepreneur, any pretty much any mentor that you can have, but I mentioned television before. So if you pull out sort of, who's been successful in television over a sustainable period of time? Let's pull, Oprah out, just first name on my mind as I think of somebody right now. Did she work 100 times harder, 1,000 times harder, 10,000 times harder than the next person? I mean, it's absurd.
Right.
And yet it is true that she's been 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times more successful than other people, other entrepreneurs, generally speaking, and then other television entrepreneurs. So you start saying, well, it's not units of hours worked. Yep. That's not the distinction, the differentiator. It's, are you focused on the right activities and constantly refining that list of activities based upon your current level of success. So you have to keep on becoming more and more selective over time.
My view is that once you start doing that the contribution is actually deeper and more fulfilling to you as an individual, done that way than done heretofore, the way of just working harder. That makes sense.
Yes, I think the results are. I think it is more meaningful. I think it's harder. In one particular way, it's harder over time, and that is that you have to be willing to say no to things that you used to say yes to. You're saying no to customers you used to want to have.
Yeah.
And so using the example that we riffed on at the beginning here, it meant that even if I started working on a book project, said, no, sorry, put it on pause.
And frankly, there's a lot of people that have it's a hard thing for them to do. So, all right, I think what you've done here is set the table to talk through the steps of essentialism from a business perspective. The first thing that we need to do is understand the spectrum of choices that we could be spending our time and resources on, right? We can't just start eliminating things that we might eliminate the wrong things. So we want to be deliberate, right? So let's talk through these steps of essentialism.
So there's two ways to do this. We can talk about it conceptually. We could use case studies to support those case studies, or we could do them right now.
Which way is more fun?
Well, I think that doing it right now has the power of relevancy to it. So let's do it.
Yeah.
So the 3 steps: explore, eliminate, execute. Let's talk about you.
Okay.
So I want you to first identify something with us right now that is essential to you, but underinvested in currently.
Essential to me, but underinvested in currently. So this is tough because I'm pretty process driven. And I'm in a constant state of evaluation on this, but let me think of something that is, I think that for my particular profession, where social currency is of value, as a person that is, not as outward facing or not as empathetic, that particular energy is hard for me to spend. So I would say that that is something that I could benefit more, but I shy away from it because I find it difficult.
Okay, so make it just concrete. Are you talking like networking? Are you talking
not only networking, but networking not for the sake of it, but for the sake of developing more valuable, kind of long-term and meaningful relationships. Yeah.
Okay, so what would success look like for you in that? Like, what would you need to be doing? I don't mean what would lead to success. I mean, what is your sort of daily investment in that would make you say, okay, that's no longer underinvested in my view. I don't mean it's perfect, but it's no longer an underinvestment. No. You're doing something you feel satisfied with. What does it look like?
Yeah. So
what's the daily commitment?
So I think in developing, these are good questions, by the way. I think in developing personal relationships, there's a lot of mental energy that needs to be expended. Who are they? What are they doing? What's interesting to them? What's our commonality? And making sure that you kind of reach out, be available, be interested, be included, be involved, put your own self and mental energy into being interested in what they do. So I think to answer this question, what I could do or what I should do is either on a face-to-face or at very least through some form of communication, be more outward bound and thoughtful in my interactions with people.
Okay, so let's try and take it, make it tangible. Is it one in-person meeting per day? Is it lunch every day, breakfast every day? Would that be okay? I've arrived at what I want to do. It's a half-hour outreach appointment with somebody that I think would be important for me to be connecting with and building a relationship with per day. Would that be success for you?
I would say probably one touch a day is not enough touches in my business. Perhaps 2 touches a day. So not with the same person, of course.
Sure. So it's two. When you say touches, you're talking, I think, about, you said sort of either, it's as tangible as possible. So it's in person, it's video conference, it's a phone call, and it's a couple of those more scheduled per day. Is that right?
Perhaps, yes.
So let's say that we're talking about an additional. I mean, is an hour real? Is that enough? I mean, we're talking about an hour. Let's call it an hour for now.
Okay.
An extra hour invested per day in that.
Sure.
Tell me one more time. Why does this matter? I mean, you said it was essential. That means it's very important.
Yes.
Why is it very important to you? Just try and get me to like the deepest why for why that matters. Something that hits home for you.
Sure. So
your deep why.
The people that we are investing in, putting to capital to work with, are people that we want to do business. We want to be comfortable with. We want to trust. We want to trust us. And those people can be founders. They can be other investors. They can be people that help out with diligence. And so having that reliable connection and that ever-growing network of folks only would improve the quality of the types of things that we do and the types of folks that we do that with.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about something jugular because you'll already be at a point where where there is success currently. So the question now is quality of the results, quality of my experience,
Yes.
Quality of just how much I can trust people. I mean, the better the person, the higher the degree of trust, the higher degree of empowerment, the less stress, the more pleasure involved. So we're talking about quite a serious increase of the quality of your entrepreneurial experience if you get this right.
That's correct.
And the second way of saying the same thing is less shallowness, less work that feels less. It's less work that's draining, less work that is that you have to put a lot into the relationship in order for there to get the results you're looking for. So there's a gain, but there's also, you can remove something that's quite exhausting right now. Does that sound right?
Well, I think broadly in many of these situations, there's a number of relationships that are very superficial, right? And you're not quite entirely sure which ones to foster and which ones to not. But you do know that the energy that you put in gives you a better chance of having a more valuable, more lasting, and more meaningful relationship.
Yeah, and there you have it. You just used the idea. This is another way of saying the why is a longer lasting, more meaningful relationship.
Yeah.
And if we just riff on that for 1 second, I mean, I think about Warren Buffett, who says that his investment strategy borders on lethargy.
Yes.
Which is an odd word to use for the most successful investor in history. And consistent with the whole M curves, that we were just describing. What I think that means, and what he's gone on to explain, is that he's trying to find the right people and then invest deeply and for the long run.
Yeah.
So once you found the right people, you're not messing with them. He says, why would I mess with the world's best managers? I'm trying to identify the world's best managers so I don't have to mess with them, tell them what to do, give them every instruction. I want the best from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think you mentioned in the book that he thinks that he owes 90% of his wealth to only 10 investments. Yeah.
And what's most remarkable about that is not that that's true, which is, of course, important. It's that he anticipated that going into his investment career. That's what's more remarkable to me, that he had the essentialist assumptions going in that a few things are valuable and most stuff is not. So you've got to, that's a mindset, a way of thinking that is at the core of being an essentialist. And we're tapping into that right now. We're saying what's something that's essential, something that would improve the quality and, over the long run, the quantity of the results that you're trying to get. Now, we've identified what it is, we've identified why it matters, and we've identified concretely what we think it would take to do it. We've approximated an hour a day. Okay, that is all step one. And it's quite a big step one. And so that's why...
Can I ask a question about that? So I thought that part of it was evaluating the spectrum of choices. And I guess I short-circuited that by kind of knowing, what some of my shortcomings are, what my, kind of human frailties are. But most people, they might not, right? So do we need to talk about spectrum of choices for people who couldn't kind of like hack it and get right to the point?
Well, what's interesting about that is that, we did hack through choices. We just did it efficiently. Now, I understand what you're saying. If somebody doesn't know, then maybe they need to sort of look at everything in their life, take everything out of the closet of their life, have a look at all of those activities they're doing, and finally get to something essential. But here's what I've learned post writing the book, and even more recently than that, even over the last few months, in fact, is that there's a way to cut through the conceptual parts of this process. And that's what we're doing. By asking you, what is something that you already identify as essential? We didn't cover this way of saying it, but something that's 90% or above on the importance continuum, something that you currently feel you're under investing in. You're tapping into your brain's sophisticated search engine that is already primed to do this. Essentialism, in some ways, sometimes I've thought, oh, you've got to be quite extreme. You've got to really push. It's hard to find what is really important. And now I realize that there's such low-hanging fruit available. Now, eventually, when somebody goes, look, I really don't know. I mean, actually, I thought it might happen, given how you began in your response. I thought you might say, as you started to, well, yeah, I've pretty processed it. I think that, the fat is out. So I don't know what it is I'd be investing. But still, it only took you half a second to actually get to it. And that's for someone who cares about this and is trying to build this efficiency, this sort of efficient, carefully curated way of living already.
Right.
And so what I've found is that people can do this real time. And often when I'm doing keynotes now, I only just barely started doing this. It was quite risky at first. And even now, it always is a little bit. You take someone from the audience and say, okay, we're going to do it right now.
Yeah.
And it's surprising to me that people can. So that's step one. I mean, yes, you can go through a more thorough process, but I think there's low-hanging fruit that most people can identify quite quickly.
Okay.
And I think it's partially because the things that are essential to us that we're underinvesting in are tapping on us. The voice, in some ways, one can hypothesize that it's like, voice of conscience tapping, saying, notice this.
Yeah.
Are you noticing this?
Yeah.
And we are too busy with other things to really face it. Or maybe we don't know what to do about it. Or maybe it's too hard. Or in your example, it's just uncomfortable. So we move on to other things.
Right.
But it's there. And when we ask an essentialist question, as we did, it brings the answer immediately forward. So this is still step one, and it's one application of step one, but it's not a bad beginning.
Yeah, it's great.
Step two is where we say, okay, well, what's the other end of the continuum? What is an activity right now that you still engage in that is, well, let's start with the extreme, 0 to 10% on the importance continuum, meaning unimportant, very unimportant, non-essential. Yeah. Something that you feel, look, I am over-investing in it. Right. I spend too much time on it. I spend too much thinking about it. I spend too much time in the evenings, in the mornings, through the day, whatever. I turn to it. It's a distraction, could be, but something non-essential that you are still investing in and over-investing in. What comes to mind when you think of that?
So I'm a fairly volitional thinker, fairly deliberate. I sense that what you're talking about here is trade-offs. I don't, this is where it gets harder for me. I don't find that the things that I'm doing have zero or no value. I almost can't tolerate that. Like I almost can't put up with that in how I go about executing on a daily basis. So I don't have those things per se. It really gets to the point where, if we're talking about trade-offs, there's very little difference between what I would be giving up and what I'd be gaining. Now, it bears a lot of mental energy to determine the difference in value. But I think what you're getting, or what I'm getting to, and you're helping me, is that it at some point it gets hard, right? If I were to say, oh yeah, I sit around and watch television for half hour every morning when I get up. Like, okay, we can ditch that. But I don't have those things that are of little value.
So what you're saying is that you've already applied essentialist practices in already shifting this continuum. You've said, look, I really am spending my time on things I perceive as being important.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
And so the non-essential stuff is, so for the sake of the listeners, let's just clarify a couple of these things. So 0 television. That's what you're saying?
I'm not saying 0 television, but
in the last week, how much television have you watched in the last week, including Netflix, on demand, everything?
Well, last night I watched about 4 hours of television. The Cubs were defeated in 13 innings against the Rockies, and I watched the entirety of that, got to bed very late, and I'm cranky because I'm a Cubs fan.
Okay. Week before, that's the only television you've watched in the last 7 days.
That's the only television that I watched that I wasn't doing something also in the foreground. That the television may have been on, but it was in the background as I was writing an essay or sending some emails or doing whatever it was that I needed to be doing.
Okay, so just to clarify, so I understand what you're saying, but how much time is television on in your world?
Not very much.
Give me an hours, minutes in the last 7 days.
I can't, but let's for the sake of argument, let's say that all in it was 6 hours of watching sports and political commentary. Okay.
Now let's do another little test.
Okay.
I'm still staying down there in this area, and I guess it could be you could give the answers, and I wouldn't in some way think, oh, I'm foiled now. The whole system doesn't work.
You're right.
If you said zero,
right.
If you said I don't spend any time on television, but I still want to start in some of the answers that I think a lot of people do find themselves surprised at how much that is existing in their life. Certainly, It's happened to me. So let's do one more test.
I think that's a great point. The point is that I think that you're trying to say is that we don't even know. We're not even necessarily conscious of how many things there are out there that aren't important to us, right? It's almost like sunk cost in our minds, and we need to change that mindset.
Yes, absolutely. It's the difference between conscious consumption and compulsive consumption.
Right.
If somebody says, I am choosing to do this thing, that alone is very different than doing it compulsively. And of course, what is important to remember is that a system has been created that is many billions of dollars have been spent to create it.
Yes.
In order to make it compulsive for us. Yep. Compulsive, addictive, and invisible.
Yep.
So we don't notice it. We wouldn't dream of not having cable coming into our home. We wouldn't dream of not having high-speed internet. These are normal reality.
Right.
Everything you just have to.
Yeah.
And I'm not even arguing that someone should eliminate that, but I'm just trying to illustrate that smartphones, high-speed internet, 1,000 channels, these things were built. They're not natural states of things. They were built and systematized and made to be effortless. How easy it is to use the latest app, how easy it is to use the latest phone, the upgrade, and how easy it is to buy that new phone. And all this is a system that has been built to put us in this position.
Greg, could I ask you, I think this is a really salient point, and could I ask you to talk a little bit here about the unimportance of practically everything and also the Pareto principle? Because I think that's where those particular things fit into this discussion.
Yes. Yes. And then I am going to come back to this little way of, a little system.
I'm not trying to get off the hook.
So yes, I mean, first of all, it's the idea is that it's difficult to overstate the unimportance of practically everything. And that's not that it feels that those things are unimportant. If they felt unimportant, I think it would be easier for us not to do them. But that these things, all this stuff in our life comes at us, taps on us. The pop-ups on the phone, the pop-ups on the computer. I could list, many of the things that we're familiar with: the latest email, the latest text, the latest tweet, the latest news update. I mean, this stuff is just an avalanche coming at us. Sometimes it can feel important because it's there, it's present. I mean, very literally on our phones, it is there in front of us, and there's a deep psychology and physiology to this that things that are close to us are given. Our brains interpret that as being important precisely because it's close. In the same sense as if a bear was about to, get you, as one of our ancestors. A bear is right in front of you. You pay attention to that. If it's right in front of you, it must be important to notice it. Well, with phones, it's tapping into the same kind of neurology, but it isn't delivering the same kind of It's not that actual reality. It just feels important because it's right in front of us, literally in our hand, right there. So we're paying attention to it. So many of the things that are in front of us and pressing on us and sensing a sort of counterfeit importance are in fact total trivia. Mm-hmm. And so the goal is to identify what is essential and to eliminate what is non-essential, these unimportant things. And Pareto, of course, is the economist who first noticed that there is an unequal connection between in his case, what he was studying was the wealthiest countries in the earth, and he found that 20% of the countries had 80% of the wealth, and that he could also even predict that within those economies, that 20% of the people would have 80% of the wealth. And he found that this was predictive in almost any economy, in almost any place in the world. And so this was the beginning of naming a certain economic phenomenon, which is really just a human phenomenon, which is just a few things account for greater than seems reasonable in terms of results. So it means that some effort focused on just certain things will yield far better returns than lots of effort on other things, on less important activities. And so this is, of course, a tremendously important principle as it applies to entrepreneurs. If you put tons of effort onto the less valuable activity, you will still end up less valuable at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And vice versa is true.
So to me, that means the data-driven decision makers should, actively seek to find out which are the 20, right? That helps you make your trade-offs.
Yes, certainly. I mean, identifying the few customers that are giving you the best return, identifying the few products that are giving you the best return, and having the courage ultimately to eliminate the things that are not actually driving the right strategy forward.
Yeah.
And there could be ways of bundling products together and services together that together make a more valuable piece. So I don't want to oversimplify the subject, but at the same time, I mean, even in sort of my field, I see this being violated constantly and feel the pressure to violate it myself, which is, so in my field, so I write, I teach. People who write and teach, especially if their writing is being received well in the marketplace and their speaking business is doing well, then it's obvious that what you ought to do as well is have a coaching business and a workshop business and train the trainer model. And there's all of these other things that could absolutely help, could absolutely be successful, could absolutely be profitable. They're all of those things. But what I have found is that you have to think about each additional product as if it's a completely new business.
Right.
And if you think about it in terms of that, then you start to go, oh, I'm not sure I want to have a fourth business and a fifth business and a sixth business. I want to have a really successful, first and second business. I want those things to just work and be as effortless as possible.
Right.
And so there's a temptation in this sort of growth for growth's sake model that comes onto entrepreneurs, because it's kind of non-essentialism in our culture, that we think we have to be doing everything that everybody else is doing, investing in all the activities that any of our competitors are investing in. And in doing so, we actually remove the core of competitive advantage, which is strategically making trade-offs, not doing what our competitors are doing.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a little courage to do it in the early days, because you're actually leaving revenue on the table. You're actually leaving profits on the table. You're actually not doing what other people are doing. And you might even be not doing what customers are asking you for. So those are all impulses that entrepreneurs want to respond to. But if they over-respond to them, they're still going to start killing their company, even as they're trying to grow it.
So the case study I immediately think of is that Southwest case study, right? Where he was basically thinking for himself, right? Not doing what all the rest of the airlines were doing, even while his customers were asking for them, but that ultimately made them among the most profitable for over the long haul airlines ever.
Yeah, I should think they are the most profitable airline in U.S. history. I would think that that's true. But what is definitely true, there was a study done in 2002 of every company in the S&P 500 over the previous 30 years. So if you think about it this way, if you put $1 into all the S&P 500 in 1972 and hold that dollar consistent for the next 30 years, of all the companies still in the S&P 500, what would your largest return have been? And the answer is Southwest to that. So they weren't just profitable for an airline industry. They were profitable against any company from the S&P 500 over that same period. So that's to me, that's pretty extraordinary. And how did they do it? Did they do it by doing everything for everyone? Of course not. Did they do it by trying to outdo Continental? No. I mean, the typical strategy in the airline industry is to get into international, because that's where the higher fees, especially for first class and business class, exist. And so that's where, the perception of like profitability will be gained there. And so, in fact, they have been deliberately non-international traveler. They have said, "Oh, we want to be hub to hub," and they were just the US for the longest time. For those 30 years, and only recently have they just increased. And they're not doing anything into Europe or anything into Asia or anything like that. Now it's, I think, Mexico and some into Canada. I mean, this is a deliberate, and thoughtful extension of what they've been doing previously. Meanwhile, you've got Continental at first laughing at Southwest, saying, "Well, these people are just they don't know what they're doing. They're not a real airline, because a real airline does everything that we do." And then after 10 years of watching Southwest execute their strategy, in fact, make their strategy stronger and harder to compete with and more profitable, finally Southwest Continental comes in. They say, "Okay, we're going to do both. We're going to straddle it." And what that meant was that they're going to create a second service line, and they called it Continental Light.
Yeah. They
didn't spin this out as a separate company. They just tried to mash them together. And what they found in the end was they'd set records in the airline industry for complaints a day, a quite staggering achievement, really.
Yep.
They lose $150 million, fire the CEO. I mean, the straddled strategy is a risky strategy, but is so frequently applied to. So very often people are doing this, and for good, well-intended, but poor strategy.
He who chases two rabbits catches none.
Well, it's exactly so, and it's actually a good little segue back to just this experiment. So I want you to do this, but I want people listening to do it particularly, and maybe we'll get different results on it. But I want you to pull out your phone right now. So this is now step 2. We did step 1, what is essential. Now we want to say what is non-essential. We're trying to find the magic time we need. We're trying to find the extra hour that you need to do what you've identified as essential. So we're going to pull out our phones just to do this. Everybody listening can do the same. You pull out your phone. You can go to settings.
I hate to tell you, but when I'm doing this, I only focus on this. I don't have my phone anywhere near me.
I love that you don't, but that means that you're being an essentialist. What people listening can do, they can pull out their phones, right, but they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to get distracted.
Okay,
that would be ironic. But they can go to settings, and then under settings they can go to battery. Under battery, they'll find that it will normally be preset to 1 day. It's a little blue bar in 1 day. They can click on 7 next to it, 7 days.
Yeah.
And next to that, there's a little clock face. They can tap on the clock face. If they follow those steps, what they're looking at now is all of the apps on their phone by number of hours and minutes spent.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Over the last 7 days. And so almost always, not always, but almost always, people are quite surprised by what they find, because they've underestimated their level of efficiency and discipline in their life. They feel like they are, I work hard, I am disciplined, I get things done, and there's not a lot of fat in the system. And they might be right. Compared to some people, it might be true, but they find, actually, there I am, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours on searching the news. Oh, there's 2 or 3 hours there searching ESPN or whatever the app of choice is, the social media. It's time we thought, I don't even realize I had that time, but I'm using that time. I not only have it, I'm using it, and I can see it right here. Mm-hmm. Now, for you, you're saying, maybe it's not there. If you had your phone, we might find that it is. Yeah. But the idea is to identify something. In your case, and I don't want to let you off the hook. It's not the idea. I don't want to let essentialism off the hook. Let's assume that you have become you already, one time you looked at your life, you said everything on here, some things are important, some things are unimportant. I'm going to focus on just the 90% and above essential activities. And you have successfully eliminated everything off. And by the way, I'm wondering, have you done that? Do you feel that there are no 80s, 70s, 60s left? You are now in the 90 and above. Is that true for you?
I am starting to, I evaluate these things all the time. I definitely feel like there are things that happen just in the course of life that I'll let happen for a little while before I get to the point where I evaluate them to say, no, I don't need to keep doing this. But for those things that have been in my life for a reasonable amount of time, let's call them 3 months or longer, I think the answer is yes.
I like this. What we can do now is we can test essentialism at the next level. And this is really important for people who have become successful entrepreneurs. And it's like the main thing they don't do, which is to take these new set of activities and spread those across a new continuum.
Yeah.
So even though it used to be 90% important, if you have something that is 90%, that is now your new zero.
Right.
And only your current 100 percentile, the very most important thing, would maintain at 100. So now what you have to say is you're saying out of the current activities, I must force rank them 1 to 100.
Right.
So just because the something is inherently not rubbish to you, right? Something that you say, well, it used to be 90% to me. That 90% item is now zero. It's 0 to 10.
Right.
So each percent is now 10%. Okay, so now I want you actually to try and do it. I want you to try and identify something that you go, well, look, I think it's important, but it's not the very most important thing.
Right. So what I would tell you is for that, when you get to that degree of calibration, in my mind, that's more mental heavy lifting. But let's, for the sake of argument, so that we can keep going with this, and I like this direction here. Let's, for the sake of argument, say that I do spend, when I could be answering emails in a sentence or 2 sentences to get my point across, I oftentimes spend more time thinking about them, composing, because I'm too much a perfectionist and I want my emails to somehow speak more than they actually need to say. And so I really could eliminate a bunch of time with the superfluous communication. I could do that at easily an hour a week.
Is that true, by the way? I know you're just coming up with something, but is it true? Do you feel like, hey, listen, I'm a perfectionist at things, and my perfectionism itself might be getting in the way of progress?
So I have a rule particularly about responding to founders, and my rule is that if oftentimes, part of essentialism is saying no over and over again, and that's really hard. When I say no to a founder that I'm not going to invest in, I like to give concrete reasons so that founder can go away and have something of value that they can adjust their presentation, or they can think through, or they can decide if I'm full of it, or that there's value to that. I kind of feel like if I don't get that founder, actually emailing me back after the rejection going, hey, thanks so much for this. This is really helpful. I appreciate it. Then I haven't done a good job. But the truth of the matter is I don't need to do that. I don't necessarily have to do it. And not all founders really care that much or find it that valuable. Like, hey, you're not giving me money. Great. There's 50 other VCs out there. So, yes, maybe not. I don't know. But nevertheless, I spend a lot of time thinking about my communication, which maybe I don't need to.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I wonder if there's a way to achieve what you're really trying to do there with a less time intensive process. I wonder whether a phone call to sort of politely say, hey, listen, I'll just then tell you some thoughts off the top of my head about this. Potentially has this warm reaction without the time investment.
For the sake of argument, though, let's say that is a thing, right? And so now I've recalibrated.
Yes.
Let me. I want to take a little bit of like a disjointed, go off track for just a second. One of the things about the book is it's really good at giving the how of making these choices, the thing that you're forcing me to do right now, right? And what I think what you're trying to get me to do, and what I'm trying to do, although I seem to be wiggling around a little bit, is you want me to use narrow and very explicit criteria, and you want me, a la kind of Derek Sivers, to put my decisions to very extreme tests, right? That's how I recalibrate. And so I just wanted to point out that I think that's what you're doing right now, and I think the book does a really good job of this how part.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and yes, I think that's right. What we're looking for is to try and discern between, in your case, which I don't think is actually that normal, but in your case, it's to not sustain the idea that because I've been very thoughtful in the past, because I have constructed my life in such a way, therefore everything that remains is now approximately the same level of importance. It's obviously from what you've described, it has already raised above a certain level of selectivity, and frankly, it could be enough for you if you say, look, I'm satisfied, I'm working, this is all working for me as it is. But if you wish to break through the next level, it is still about becoming even more discerning, more thoughtful. If I'm an art collector, and I remember this actually early on, I had a certain taste in art, and I would buy that art, and I thought it was important, and I thought there was a certain price I'd be willing to pay, and so on. But as the years have gone past, and I think, and I'm in no way a curator, but as I've taken a step forward, my taste has improved, my sense of what matters and what's valuable has improved. And so suddenly things before that I wouldn't notice, I now notice.
Right.
And in a similar way, what we're trying to do is not increase the workload, but increase the discernment.
Yep.
So that the difference between U 2.0, right, your current version, and U 3.0 shouldn't be more work. It shouldn't even be more perfectionism. It should be more discernment. What of these things actually is the most important, most essential work to do?
Yeah.
Back to the Warren Buffett, for example, for a second. He's quoted at least as having said that the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything.
Right.
So that, of course, is hard. So to do it as gracefully as he manages to is impressive, because he seems to be able to do it in a way that he isn't burning bridges with everybody. No, he's one of the most respected entrepreneurs and investors anywhere. He's figured out ways to be able to hold a conference that everybody can come to. It's fun. It's energetic. I like to do it. In this way, I get to give back and communicate with tens of thousands of people in person, in fact. But that's his way of building that system, instead of emailing every single person back that he could email. There's a fascinating anecdote of when he became friends with Bill Gates, and they're having dinner together, and as Bill Gates gets to know him, Bill is the CEO at the time of Microsoft. He's absolutely fascinated to find that the Buffett has literally one thing on his calendar on one of the weeks. In he holds a calendar with him in a little notebook with all his appointments, and the one appointment in there is to get his hair cut. And there is not a single other appointment on his calendar all week. And Bill is going, okay, this guy is one of the most successful CEOs ever, one of the most successful entrepreneurs ever. He's obviously operating out a completely different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So he looks at his own calendar and says, mine is packed full. I'm operating out of greater and greater efficiency mindset. I'm going to have more and more appointments, shorter, try and tie them in, try to be, Warren Buffett's not trying to do that. He's playing a completely different game. He's playing a different strategy.
Yeah.
And likewise here, I want to be careful that essentialism doesn't turn into, for you or for anyone, into perfectionism.
Yeah.
That's a special form of non-essentialism, actually.
Very interesting.
That whatever we do, we must do perfectly.
Right.
No. Now let's perfectly do what should not be done at all.
Right.
That's perfectionism. And it will stifle us. It will kill us. What I want for you is almost nothing on your schedule.
Right.
What I want for you is maximum space so that you have maximum options to do the thing that you now feel,
right,
attuned to do next.
Yep.
And so that's really the target. Let's move, just so that we get the whole 3 steps system out here, to the third step.
Okay.
The third step is execution. It means building a system that's as effortless as possible.
Sure.
It's a system that produces the results you're trying to produce, whether you feel like producing them or not.
Right.
It's when you feel like going out there and doing a certain task, fine, now you're going to do it. But what about the every other day you don't want to do it? You need a system that works then as well.
Right.
And when your discipline is low, so you use your available discipline to build a system that then acts and works for you. Clearly that is the case for Warren Buffett with his one appointment a week. That doesn't mean nothing's happening that week. Lots of things are happening.
Right.
He just doesn't have to be the one pushing the levers and making it happen, because he already built the system to make the results happen, to get the right people, getting Munger involved. Right. That's an important hire, getting the right person, build the system. If you've got the right people, if you've got the right support system, then results are flowing whether you're thinking about them or not. We can go into more depth into that, but ultimately that's what we're trying to do, so that we don't have to be pushing the boulder up the hill.
Yep.
The boulder is now flowing without our direct effort and attention.
So I think we are getting nearer to the end, but I like this a little bit more depth on this execution step, and I'm going to reel off some things that I picked up on from you, and maybe just a quick thought on its relative value in the process. The first was keep focused and avoid distraction. That seems once you've made your choice, that you don't get drawn away by a shiny object.
Oh, yes. I mean, it certainly does include that. I mean, one of the ways to do that is to build a routine in place so that you don't have to spend time each day going, okay, well, now what will I do? Mm-hmm. And now what's the next thing? And you use up your energy in, what's called decision fatigue, right? Whereby, because we have to remake the decisions every day, we find we're 11 o'clock, we're out of, our mental energy and discipline, and so then we're distracted and reactive because we're exhausted. And so there's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur who invested his own money in his business, didn't take outside investment, but grew it to like $500 million personal fortune. And when I was talking to him, interviewing him, one of the things he said was that he gets up exactly the same time every day. He takes a packed lunch to work every day. He leaves work at the office same time every day. And why, I said, prodding him, fine, you've got a routine. Why? Because I don't want to use any of my creative energies rethinking the mundane. So you want your mundane activities to be as effortless as possible, so you don't have to think about them.
Yeah.
So that you can be thinking about next level activities.
So for those people that pick up the book, go in the book and find the Michael Phelps story, because the Michael Phelps story, I think, is phenomenal and illustrative exactly of what Greg's talking about here. I thought that was great, by the way. The other thing that I thought was, in terms of the execution piece, that I thought was really significant and kind of next level, is find joy in whatever it is that you do choose to do, even the mundane things.
Yes, I think that's right. There's sort of two ways of improving, the meaning of a moment. One is to change the activity. That you say, okay, I want to do something that I feel is meaningful for me. And wherever you could do that, of course, that's an excellent strategy. But then there's a whole set of other activities. We can call them the maintenance activities, the things that that either we cannot outsource or we feel like it would be wiser not to outsource. And so they are part of the cost for getting the results you want to get. And right now they fall to you. And then what you want is to find the meaning in them. These are the things that for right now we either cannot control or we have chosen to maintain, and so to find meaning, to connect the dots between this activity and why we're doing it, and why, so that we can have joy in this moment. I mean, I really think there's not much worse than activity without purpose. But often there is purpose to activity if we pause to ask about it.
Right.
Why am I doing this thing?
Right.
Why am I, I unload the dishwasher in my house an awful lot. I'm not the only person who does it, but that job is going to be done. And I can either resent it or I can find joy in it, and I can reconnect to the why. Well, I'm doing this so that my home is in order, so that my family can can enjoy their growing up and their development, and have space and a cleanliness and orderliness that allows them the freedom to think boldly and do creative things. I'm doing it so that I can work on the television show. I'm doing it so that I can. And if you can connect the dots between the mundane and your why, then suddenly there is joy even in those activities.
Yeah, I agree with that. So the podcast typically ends with 3 questions, but I have one more non-3 questions question for you. Before we wind down, I know we've taken a lot of time here. So the question is about saying no, and saying no. We touched on this right at the beginning, right? Saying no over and over again is actually very difficult to do, right? We're inclined to want to say yes. That is the path often of least resistance. So could you? There's 2 concepts around saying no that if you could touch on, I would appreciate, and I think would kind of be a really good tail end to this. One is setting boundaries, and the other is maintaining emotional discipline. Your thoughts around those, and then I think we'll head right to the end.
Well, I mean, they're related principles, actually. You build the routines. I mean, you build the boundaries so that you can cope when somebody else is being emotionally reactive.
I see.
If you don't build boundaries and then somebody is emotionally reactive in your world, then you will take on their emotional reactivity, and they will, without even meaning to, control you. And so you don't want the most emotional reactive person to be in charge of your world. That's not a great recipe.
Right.
And so you want to build, it's the old statement, right? Fences make good neighbors. You want to be able to get them clear within your own mind. What are your boundaries? And you might only know them or learn them by violation. Somebody violates them, you feel violated, and you go, I've now discovered a boundary within me. Yeah. Now the question is what to do next about it. And I think it is to, first of all, write them down. So this is what it is. Write them down. Don't immediately just start trying to express them to people. You write them down, and then you get to think about, well, how would I want to express this going forward with people? And how might I, once I get the wording right, express them up front to people so that they know this This is inviolable for me. Let me just tell you up front. People respond far better to expectations like that, to boundaries, if they know them up front.
Yeah.
And you just express them. Then they can choose. Do I still want to work with you? Do I still want to do this if I know these are the boundaries? Oh, it's much better. Right up front. Here are the things I will do. Here are the things I will not do.
Yeah.
Here are the things here's how it works for me. And if we can keep within this is going to work really well. And if not, that's okay. You can go your way, I'll go my way, and we'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Oftentimes people will actually respect that more. Okay, on to 3 questions. The first one is, did I miss anything here? I mean, I think you took me through the 3 steps. Kicking and screaming, you might argue. I was not trying to, but nevertheless, I ended up doing that. But did we miss anything about essentialism that's like a really key point that you really just think we can't end this interview without talking about it?
I know. I think that we sort of covered one thing that comes to mind is just that essentialism is not saying no to everyone and everything without thinking about it either.
Right.
That would be a different kind of book. That would be noism. And I didn't write a book called Noism. And the difference really is a big difference. You've got to actually, that what drives this is what is essential and why does that matter? Okay. And those become your big yeses, so that then, of course, there have to be no's, and you'd rather make those deliberately than have them made for you reactively.
Yeah, that is a great point. And honestly, that is a point that you make kind of front and center. And I agree, we should have talked about that. I assume that you want people to find you out in the world. Where would our listeners of this podcast find you? What's your preferred method? I communicate. I communicate it on LinkedIn. People can get updates there and have a good conversation with not just me but other people who are involved in trying to apply this in entrepreneurial ways. So that's literally one place. But in some ways, what I think it's better for people is just actually be on the journey with me. Read Essentialism, get people around you to read it together, and have experiments, so that when you're part of the conversation, you're bringing your lessons to the table, and it's not a one-way street. I mean, I think that there are people out there who have read Essentialism more times than I've read it, and I have gone back and reread it, but they've really embraced these ideas, and they bring a lot to the conversation and a lot to the dialogue. That's a great answer. And then finally, any materials that you would recommend besides the book, people to get started, to kind of create checklists, to make decisions and trade-offs, anything out there that you would point to for people?
Well, something that you could add to, somewhere, I don't know quite, but show notes, sure, is there's a 21-day challenge that I create. It's very simple. You just do each items each day for 21 days. So you just check them off. You don't have to do each item for 21 days. It's just each one that you just do, and it gives you a little glimpse into your life, and it's some small wins to get you going on this transformation to becoming an essentialist. And
that is on the Essentialism website, right?
I don't know that it is available just there, but you can. Jennifer can provide it to you, and you can put it in the show notes.
Perfect. Greg, we did it. Thank you very much. There's a lot, right? It's a challenging conversation to think your way through. So, thanks for the, creating that story arc with me and kind of illustrating. I think that probably helped.
Yes, this is. I am absolutely enjoyed our conversation and enjoyed applying essentialism together in this way.
This has been Intangibles. As always, I'd like to thank Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com for being the sponsor this season and a supportive partner. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. I'd also like to thank Ben Glowy, our sound engineer. If you would like to work with him, he can be reached via Twitter. His handle is @venture_sound. And thank you. Keep an eye out for the next episode. I'm your host, Steve BERG.